A quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Denver, where the lawns are manicured and the streets are lined with picket fences. It looks peaceful, almost too peaceful, but like every community, there's a story beneath the surface. A story about control, about power, and about the quiet moments when someone tries to take more than they're given. I came home expecting nothing more than a hot shower and some silence. Instead, I found something I wasn't ready for. A small-town sheriff with a badge made of plastic, running a one-person campaign to rewrite the rules of our neighborhood. Her name was Clara Donovan, and she wasn't just patrolling our streets, she was policing our lives. What happened next wasn't just about me, it was about Oakridge, about a community waking up from a long sleep, realizing that no one is above the law, not even the people who think they're the ones making the rules. Sam Carter had just wrapped up a grueling 3-week training session in the sweltering desert. His body ached, and his mind was still foggy from the relentless heat and exhaustion. All he wanted was to pull into his quiet neighborhood of Oakridge, a peaceful suburban enclave, just outside Denver, Colorado, and park his truck in his parents' driveway. Maybe take a long shower, sip a cold beer, and forget about the heat and the military drills for a while. As he turned onto the familiar streets of Oakridge, the last thing he expected was to see a flashing, red-blue light on a car parked right across the road, his brow furrowed. It wasn't a police car, he'd know that much, but it had the distinct look of a homemade siren, the kind you'd find on an overpriced emergency light from an online store. A Dodge Charger sat there, its engine idling, the kind of car that screamed, "I'm not from around here." The driver, a woman in her mid-40s wearing sunglasses and a black jacket, looked like she was trying too hard to be in charge. Sam's instinct told him something was off, but he'd just driven for hours, and the last thing he wanted to do was make waves. He rolled his window down, glancing at the dashboard to see the flashing lights flicker, as if they were somehow official. He tapped his fingers lightly on the steering wheel, wondering if he was losing his mind. The woman whose name tag read Clara Donovan, Oakridge Neighborhood Protection Officer, didn't waste any time. She stepped forward with an air of authority, one that seemed far too exaggerated for someone wearing a makeshift badge. "Good afternoon, sir," she called out in a tone that didn't sound like it was meant to be polite. "I'll need to see your registration license and military ID. You've been flagged for violating local parking regulations." Sam blinked slowly, lowering his sunglasses and fixing his gaze on her. He wasn't angry, just confused. He hadn't seen the words "local parking regulations" anywhere on a real government sign. The HOA, he knew, was strict about a few things. But this was something else entirely. "Parking regulations," he asked, his voice flat. "I've been driving for the past 8 hours. My truck's not even in a designated spot. Are you telling me I'm being fined for dust?" Clara's expression hardened. She didn't like being questioned. "Don't be difficult, sir. Just show me the papers." Sam wasn't ready to deal with this. Not today. Not when he was bone-tired. But he decided to humor her, reaching into the glove compartment. He pulled out his military ID, showing it to her briefly before leaning back in his seat. He wasn't going to hand over everything. Not to this woman. Not without any explanation. "Here's my ID. But that's all I'm giving you," Sam said, his voice steady, but something simmering underneath. The last thing he needed was to deal with someone who thought they had the power to control everything in their little neighborhood. Clara's lips thinned. "That's not how this works, soldier," she snapped. "I need everything." Now, Sam raised an eyebrow, glancing back at the long, empty street. He didn't understand what kind of power trip this woman was on, but he could already tell that this wasn't going to end well, if he just played along. He sighed, then tossed a glance at the rearview mirror. That's when he saw it. A small convoy of military trucks was heading his way. The dust trailing behind them like a storm. His heart skipped a beat. Sam didn't have to check the vehicles to know who was in them. This was his unit. He knew every face, every driver. This was going to get interesting, and he wasn't going to play into Clara's delusions of power. Clara, on the other hand, hadn't noticed the convoy approaching. She was too busy barking orders, her tone full of self-importance. Sam wasn't sure if she was acting like a fake cop out of some twisted sense of authority, or if she genuinely believed she could stop anyone on the street. Either way, she didn't seem to care that she was about to meet her match. Just as Sam was about to speak, the convoy pulled to a stop behind him. The Humvee in particular pulled up close enough that Clara could see the soldiers inside. She stiffened, but didn't back down. From the Humvee, Captain Emily Lawson stepped out tall and commanding, the kind of woman whose mere presence silenced a room. Sam could almost feel the shift in the air as she stepped onto the pavement. Her eyes locked on Clara's flashy siren. Clara's self-assurance faltered for a moment, but she quickly straightened, trying to maintain control of the situation. "I'm detaining this man for—" "Not so fast." Captain Lawson interrupted, her voice, calm but firm. She was already looking down at the homemade badge on Clara's jacket. The absurdity of it not lost on her. Sam couldn't help but smirk. He was pretty sure this was about to get very interesting. Clara's voice wavered slightly as she tried to push forward. "This man is in violation of Oakridge's community parking rules. I'm enforcing HOA policy here." Captain Lawson's eyebrow arched. "Are you?" "Because I don't see any real authority behind those lights." The soldiers behind her exchanged amused looks. Sam could feel the shift in power, like a wave about to crash down on Clara's delusions. He glanced at her, finally, seeing the cracks in her facade. The situation was about to explode, and Sam knew it. The community's little self-appointed sheriff was about to face the truth of what happens when someone oversteps their bounds. He just hoped that when everything was over, Oakridge would be a little bit less susceptible to people like Clara Donovan. The air in Oakridge was thick with tension as Captain Emily Lawson stepped forward, her sharp gaze locked on Clara Donovan, who stood frozen in the face of real authority. Clara tried to maintain her composure, but there was no denying the fear creeping into her eyes. She had thought herself untouchable, the self-proclaimed sheriff of the neighborhood, but now, standing before military personnel who had come to Sam's aid, her little empire was crumbling before her eyes. "Step back, Ms. Donovan," Captain Lawson said, her voice steady and commanding. "You're detaining a man who has the right to be here, a man who serves his country and is returning home. And you're doing so with a fake badge and zero jurisdiction." Clara blinked, trying to regain control. I have authority here," she stammered, her voice cracking with uncertainty. "I'm the neighborhood protection officer. I was elected by the community board to keep order." The mention of elected made the soldiers behind her exchange confused glances. Sam watched the scene unfold, a sense of satisfaction growing inside him. This was the moment Clara had dug her own grave, and the rest of the community was about to see it. Captain Lawson's eyes narrowed. "No one elected you, Clara. You've been using your own version of authority to terrorize this neighborhood for far too long, and now you've made a big mistake." The soldiers, including Sam's friends from the unit, began to spread out, forming a loose circle around the scene. Clara had no escape route now. She turned to Officer Frank Davis, her loyal accomplice, who stood beside her looking as unsure as she did. "You can't just walk in and arrest me," Clara hissed, her voice rising in pitch. "This is my neighborhood. I'm just trying to keep things safe." Sam, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "Safe by threatening people with fake tickets for wrong flowers, or stopping veterans like me because we look out of place. That's not safety, that's tyranny." Rebecca Harris, the newly elected HOA president, emerged from the crowd of curious onlookers. Her face was hard, but there was a note of triumph in her eyes. "Clara, you've been voted out. The board made that decision months ago. You have no authority here anymore." Clara's face went pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. This was the moment she had feared. The lie was unraveling, and everyone was watching it happen in real time. Captain Lawson stepped closer, addressing Clara, with a finality that made her shrink back. "You've overstepped. Now you're going to answer for it." The crowd that had gathered around began murmuring in agreement, their voices rising in a chorus of support for Sam and the military personnel. Clara's reign of terror was ending, and she had nowhere to hide. The community had finally awakened, and they were done being silent. As Captain Lawson spoke to Officer Davis, instructing him to collect Clara's badge and remove her from the area, Sam couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just for himself, but for the entire neighborhood. The balance of power had shifted, and this time, the people had won. The crowd was watching as Clara, once so full of herself, was escorted away by the soldiers, her face flushed with humiliation. But it wasn't just her defeat that marked the turning point. It was the realization that Oakridge was no longer under the thumb of one person's self-appointed authority. The community had come together, and they weren't going to let anyone bully them anymore. The morning after Clara's public disgrace, the air around Oakridge felt different. It was as if the weight of months, maybe even years of silent frustration had finally lifted from the community. The streets, once tense with the specter of Clara's self-made authority, now buzzed with a new energy. It was a strange feeling for Sam Carter, who was still processing the events from the previous day. After all, what had just transpired wasn't just about him. It was about everyone in Oakridge reclaiming their peace and autonomy. As Sam stepped outside, he caught sight of the neighborhood in a way he hadn't before. People were talking, laughing, sharing stories about the showdown with Clara. Neighbors he'd barely spoken to before were now waving and stopping to chat with him. The change was subtle, but palpable. They had seen the cracks in Clara's facade, and now they were standing a little taller, a little prouder. It wasn't just about Clara anymore. It was about the courage to stand up to anyone who tried to wield power unjustly. Sam's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a message from Rebecca Harris, the newly elected HOA president. She had been there yesterday, standing firm with the rest of the community, but today she was reaching out with a more personal request. "Hey Sam, can we talk? I think I found a way for you to get involved in the next HOA meeting. We need someone with a clear head and strong principles." "You game?" Sam stared at the message for a moment. He wasn't sure if he was ready to jump into the HOA politics. He wasn't even technically a resident of Oakridge. But he had a feeling that now was the time for the neighborhood to rebuild, to restore trust and fairness to their little corner of the world. As he typed his response, he thought about Clara, about the power she'd tried to take, the lives she'd tried to control, and the way she'd used fear to make people bow down. It was easy to point at her and laugh now, but the truth was that her actions had harmed more people than he'd realized, and that wasn't going to go unnoticed. Sam's fingers hovered over the screen as he crafted a reply. He wanted to help, but he also knew the road ahead would be difficult. The fight for transparency, for justice, wasn't won in a single battle. It took time. It took trust. And the community needed to be reminded of that. "I'll be there. Let's do this," he typed, sending the message. Later that afternoon, the HOA meeting took place in the community clubhouse, a place that had seen countless trivial disputes over mailbox heights, lawn ornaments, and parking violations. But today, the stakes were higher. This wasn't just about regulations. It was about trust, about reclaiming a community that had been poisoned by fear and overreach. Sam arrived early, entering the clubhouse to find Rebecca talking with several other residents. They were all eagerly awaiting the meeting, some looking hopeful, others uncertain about what the future might hold. The once divided group now had a common goal: to rebuild, to make sure something like Clara's reign could never happen again. As the meeting began, Rebecca addressed the crowd. "Yesterday, we witnessed something that none of us thought we'd ever see in Oakridge: a neighborhood protector turned imposter, a false sense of security shattered. But today, we have the chance to rewrite our story. We can be better than what we were." The room fell silent. Sam stood at the back, leaning against the wall, listening intently. There was no question in his mind now. This wasn't just about fixing policies. This was about restoring dignity to a place that had lost its voice. When Rebecca turned to him, nodding, Sam knew it was his turn. He stepped forward, his presence commanding the room's attention. For a moment, everything was still. Clara's shadow was long, but Sam was ready to help Oakridge step out from under it. "I'm not from here technically, Sam began, his voice clear. But I've learned something over the past few days. It's not about regulations or rules. It's about people. It's about standing up for each other, for what's right. We can't afford to let fear dictate how we live. We need to build a community that's not afraid to speak up, not afraid to hold each other accountable. And I'm willing to help make that happen. The room erupted into applause. It was a small but powerful gesture, a sign that Oakridge was changing. Sam didn't know what the future would look like, but he knew that they had made the first step toward a fairer, more transparent community. As the applause died down, Rebecca smiled at him. "You're right, Sam. This isn't just about rules, it's about trust, and we're going to need a lot of it if we're going to rebuild." Sam nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead, but also the hope that things could get better. He wasn't sure where this would take him, but for the first time in a long while, he was ready to fight for something bigger than himself. The meeting continued, but Sam's mind was already racing ahead, thinking of all the work still to be done. Oakridge had been saved from one impostor, but it was going to take a united effort to ensure no one would ever try to take its heart again.